Before we get started, we wanted to thank Liberty Mutual Surety for sponsoring this episode of Let's Get Surety. Liberty Mutual Surety provides contract and commercial bonds for all size companies and contractors around the world. Liberty Mutual is here for you today, tomorrow, together. For more information on Liberty Mutual's breadth of surety products and solutions, visit www.libertymutualsurety.com. Now on to our show.
You're listening to Let's Get Surety. Let me hear your bonding talk with Kat Shamapande.
Hey everyone, it's Kat Shamapande. Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Let's Get Surety. I've got with me today my co-host, Mark McCallum, CEO of NASBP. Hey Mark, thanks for being on.
Hi Kat, I love to be here as always, and I know we've got a great guest today.
We have a great guest, and we're going to be talking about a topic I know that's always of interest. We're going to be talking about subcontractor and supplier prequalification.
Very important topic.
It is an important topic in our industry. So to chat with us about that today, we have Brad Robinson. He's a partner with Ward & Robinson, LLC. Hey, Brad, thanks for being on.
Hi, great. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Well, Brad, before we dive into this topic, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background, and maybe a little bit about Ward & Robinson as well?
Sure. So I started my career, I'm an old guy, so I started my career many years ago. I worked for a Big Four accounting firm for about 12 years and then decided I didn't want to work, 100 hours a week anymore. And I went to work for a couple of small contractors, and then I ended up at a large international contractor, Lend-Lease. A lot of people might remember the name is Bovis years ago. And I moved from accounting into treasury, which was kind of got to my exposure to surety. And then I left Lend-Lease about 6 years ago and took on a CFO role for a small specialty sub in my home state of Alabama. I worked there for 3 years, and then the private equity bought out the company, and I kind of decided, didn't really know what I was going to do next. So a good friend of mine and I that actually worked together at Lend-Lease is a CPA as well, and we basically hung the shingle with the two of us, and the idea was my partner's background is pretty much in public accounting. He has a lot of technical accounting expertise. And mine has been more in treasury, banking, surety, the CFO type work. And so basically the focus of our practice is just to help smaller contractors that wouldn't necessarily have access to a consulting firm or for whatever, couldn't afford the rate per hour necessarily, right? So we do a lot of different projects for smaller contractors when they don't have the staff or the expertise to get things done. So that's basically what we're doing for now.
Well, and it sounds like you'll have a unique perspective on this when we're talking about pre-qualification, because you worked for both a large contractor and for a subcontractor at different times in your career.
I would agree with that, sure.
Yeah. Well, we certainly appreciate the ability to plumb your expertise on the subject of subcontractor pre-qual. And that's an important subject, and it's always been an important subject for a long time. But it seems like in the last year or so, with a lot of uncertainty, that people really need to give it some very careful thought. And it's obviously it's about risk mitigation and a whole lot more. But kind of maybe tell us your experience when you were with a small contractor, then a very large contractor, and a subcontractor, how you looked at subcontractor pre-qualification in those different entities.
Okay, I'm actually going to start. That's a great question. I'm actually going to start, Mark, if you don't mind, from the end and go backwards, because my experience. Sure. I worked for the large contractor first, and that's where I got my real exposure. But that's a little bit more discussion. So let me start with the smaller one. So the specialty sub that I worked for was a scaffolding contractor. So scaffold rental. There wasn't a lot of bond opportunity. But I came from an environment where I had a co-surety program. I think we had 3 or 4 sureties in our program at Lend-Lease. So a very large program, and obviously had a lot of experience. And I remember talking we had to have a bond not too long after I'd become CFO. And I called the surety agent and I started saying, hey, it's what we need. I'm not sure what our aggregate and single limits are. And they had never had anybody that worked for this company that had any surety experience. And he goes, wow. So it was really shocked. And he goes, I said, yeah, I've done this before. I said, I don't know as much as you guys, but I know enough to be dangerous. So really it was really more about educating our internal, like the owners of the value proposition that a surety brings.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, and I'm sure your listeners are very aware of this, people look at bonding sometimes as a necessary evil, but they don't look at necessarily the value proposition that a surety can bring. So we didn't write a lot of bonds there, but my job there basically was to educate our internal stakeholders as to the necessity, the requirement of providing financial statements in a certain form, why this was important. And of course, the surety agent and the credit provider, they just loved it because they spent most of their time educating smaller subs like ours. And of course, since I came from a larger contractor, it was a little easier. Having said that, and backing up to earlier in my career, so I really had coming out of public accounting and with the company that I worked with before I came to work for Lend-Lease, I had no exposure to surety at all. And then when I became treasurer at Lend-Lease, I basically had to learn. I had a great agent that I worked with that basically educated me along the way, took me hand in hand. It was fantastic. But there, the challenge with the contractor there wasn't so much. I came in before SDI really, the wave of SDI kind of hit with Zurich back in, you ought to help me here, Mark. It's probably 15 years ago, maybe. I don't remember exactly when it. Yeah. I don't remember exactly. Ago, can it? You've tried to forget it, I'm sure. and so the pre-qualification process became paramount because obviously we were having to do our own underwriting, and it was an educational experience for me, but it was also for my team, but it was also for the business in the sense that it was just a surety bond was just a checklist item for the most part for Lend-Lease. Well, when the opportunity came along, if people listening remember, or maybe you don't know, but a lot of the big contractors just thought this was a profit enhancement. They were throwing everything into SDI without any pre-qualification. And we made the decision that we weren't going to do that because that was the temptation, because there was margin enhancement, within potential margin enhancements within projects. But I could see just based on what I knew that the market wouldn't always be this way. Just thinking how the surety market goes from hard to soft, I just had to believe it wasn't always going to be gravy in SDI. So we really needed to button up our pre-qualification process. So we basically came up with our own kind of method. I borrowed kind of the process that our surety goes through to underwrite or to look at our financials. And I built a financial statement model off of that. So basically the things that your listeners, again, are familiar with, dropping prepaids below the line, 50% credit for investments and the like. And then we looked at other things like D&B reports. We'd get a letter from a bank. Probably a sensitive topic again. We get a good letter from the surety at times, depending on the situation. And we were really quite successful. I think I can't remember exactly how many defaults we had when I was there up to the time I left Lend-Lease, but it was in single digits. So consequently, we probably left money on the table, but I also wasn't so bold to believe that I knew enough about it that we were conservative on purpose, I guess is what I'm saying, because I would rather leave money on the table than have a potential default. So anyway, it was kind of rocky coming out of the gate, but after a while, once the company educated on the process, then the question became, when do we bond and when do we use SDI? And interestingly enough, what a lot of contractors were doing at the time is they would take all the great all the good subs on the job, and they would bond the others, which, was patently unfair to the surety partners because they were getting the risky subs. And I choose not to do it that way. What we would do is we would enroll a job in SDI, but if we had contractors that we felt like were high risk, we would as soon as we saw some that were high risk, I felt it was important to preserve the relationship with our surety to not really de-enroll it. But we wouldn't sign up any of those subcontractors for SDI because I didn't think it was fair to give the surety provider all the bad and keep the good. And I got a lot of pushback on that internally, but that was the way we did it at Lend-Lease anyway.
Well, I think you brought up a really good point, which is, any contractor needs to be very thoughtful about how they do their subcontractor pre-qualification program, and they really need to invest in it. So it's not, you can't just throw everything into an SDI program or whatever. They need to be thoughtful about the resources that they're devoting and to be consistent in their standards, I would imagine. And then they also have to really need to think about, how they're going to address that risk, whether pre-qualification is in of itself sufficient, whether it needs to be, bonds, subcontract bonds, or whether they feel like assuming some of that risk, right, through an SDI program. So you had alluded that not all contractors are that thoughtful, and I'm sure there's some SDI experience out there now for those that haven't been. On the flip side, as a subcontractor, how did you feel about a contractor's subqual process? What was right. Both you saw as, well, that allows me to differentiate ourselves as a sub, and then what made you uncomfortable?
As a subcontractor, right? Well, probably the biggest thing, and I'm sure this hasn't changed since I've gone out kind of into the consulting world of the past couple of years. I'm sure this is still the same. The biggest gripe I had, and my peers in finance in the subcontract world had, is every single general had a different form, a different process, a different way to pre-qual. And we tried our best to try to streamline that as much as possible. But basically, of course, the general is saying, look, if you want to work for us, this is the process. And of course, we wanted to work. So that was probably the biggest complaint that I had. And, since we didn't do as many bonds in my experience as a sub versus when I was a general, I mean, over 3 years, we might have done 20. So it wasn't a huge number of bonds.
Yeah.
But I think the administration difference was a hang up. Some of the questions that we would be asked, there was always sensitivity around financial statements. That was one of the big things that
right.
I know as a general that I would get a lot. And I just took the same information I did at Lend-Lease onto my subcontractor job and did the same thing. So like if I had a subcontractor, for example, as a general, and I said, hey, we need to see your financial statements for the last 3 years. What we would do is get financial statements for the last 2 years, audited and reviewed. And then if they were more than 6 months stale, an internal unaudited statement. And oftentimes the audited statements I get some pushback for, but the internal ones almost always, 80% of the time. But you don't need to see them. Well, you guys know this because you see financial statements from surety clients all the time. The older the data gets, the more stale it is and the less useful it is. That was our idea. So they would come to us and say, well, there's a confidentiality issue here. We don't, especially if it was a small family-owned business, well, the owners don't want to release those financial statements, or we don't release them. And so what I would offer when I worked at Lend-Lease is a two-party non-disclosure, NDA. Okay, so oftentimes an NDA is one-sided. Like, I'm going to give you this, but you can't. So I would offer, look, I won't tell you anything about your things. You don't tell anybody about mine, because in the U.S. we weren't a public company. Lend-Lease wasn't a public company. And so I used the same thing when I got to my subcontractor job. When the owners had sensitivity to the financials just like anyone else. And I'd say, listen, we have some sensitivity around this. We have a non-disclosure agreement drafted, a two-party, and I'll be happy to provide this, but I need an officer to execute it on both sides, because we will give the same level of confidence and non-disclosure to your information, and we would like for you to do the same for us. And honestly, I don't remember a time I ever got pushback. I think the conflict becomes we just automatically say no and don't offer any kind of alternative. And then it becomes a little bit kind of, it just becomes an unfortunate disagreement in a process that's already kind of stressful anyway. Those are probably the biggest things. The actual providing information, it's all pretty standard. What's your backlog? What do your financials look like? If they had questions about maybe some ratios, or we would use information like when I was the subcontractor, again, information I brought from the general, we would measure ourselves against best in class contractors. There's a lot of surveys out in the marketplace for that. And then I would do the same. So when I was, that's what I was accustomed to. Like we would have when I was at Lend-Lease, we would have a best in class for say electrical or HVAC. And then we would measure those financials against best in class. Well, when I became the sub, when we were producing financial statements, it took us about 9 months, but I would constantly be on our operations guys and the other members of the finance team to say, this is our target, this vanilla company that's a scaffold rental company, best in class. This is what we want our ratios to look like. Mm-hmm. And what that does two things. One, it provides a baseline of excellence within the organization, but it also provides the general contractor comfort that, hey, you're doing what you're supposed to do. You've got adequate liquidity. You're burning your backlog appropriately. You're not taking on more work than you can do. You've got adequate backup lines of credit, et cetera. The things that sureties are concerned about. That experience in the general contractor helped me immensely. I don't know that the owners really necessarily saw that, but working with our surety partners and internally as a finance team, it was invaluable because I could take that information that I learned as a general and would look at what were the pain points for the sub and then translate those into my new role.
Right. A couple thoughts strike me initially. I wonder how many GCs are so thoughtful about that, and particularly with what I call sensitive financial information. And, I'm sure that's a difficult subject for a lot of subs. They may not know where that information is going or how it's going to be used. I love that you were able to take your experience and then a two-way NDA so that there was that assurance from a sub perspective. Obviously, for surety, it's a third party. They hold that information in confidence, so you don't run into that type of thing. But it's also interesting how you leveraged it at Lend-Lease to have a more attractive position with your surety as well.
Yeah, I think, like I said, it was invaluable. And I think also, too, I want to make the point, I appreciate you bringing that up, Mark, because I would also tell people when I delivered the NDA as the general contractor, I would say there were only two people in this organization that are going to lay eyes on your financial statements. There will be me or one other person that was a specific underwriter, and that's it. Because what they were obviously concerned about is competitive. They didn't want another competitor to see their financials. Yep. And we would specifically put that in the NDA to say that and we would even list, these are the two people that will have access to your financial statements and no other person. Now, could we have done it? Sure. But I wanted to put it out there. If I offered it, it's like anything else. If you offer something to someone and they're surprised that you're offering it, it's much easier than having to negotiate it on the back end. Right. And I really got a lot of positive feedback from that because you still had people that were cautious and they didn't want to, they were still concerned. But once we had worked with people, more than once or twice, and they got comfortable with it, it worked out beautifully.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Well, and you mentioned also, like when you were SDI first became popular use within the construction industry, that, your company used it conservatively. Not all companies did. Have you seen a change in the way SDI is used in the construction industry as a whole over time?
Well, I think, my experience is that it's kind of the pendulum's kind of swung back to the center, so to speak. I think initially it was the new thing in town. I think, in fact, I recently had this conversation with someone that it was kind of like when Uber came onto the scene. Everybody wanted to get the Uber app. Everybody wanted to use Uber, and now I'm just as likely to use Uber as I am a cab. Because they're relatively pretty simple. So I think it's kind of the same thing has happened in our industry. Initially, there was this disruption in discourse because you had this very stable credit provider in the marketplace to provide credit to contractors that have been there forever. But, let's be honest, back then it was probably a little lazy. And I mean lazy by the fact that, right, wrong, or indifferent, the perception was everything's fine and good until there's a claim. And then, I'm not saying that sureties were slow to process claims. That's debatable and it depends on the person. But the perception was that at the time. And yes, you guys know, perception is people's reality. So this came out of this idea, oh, we can handle the claim faster because we're the general and we can substitute someone faster, we can get someone else, da da da. Well, then at the time it was kind of I don't know, I won't say panic, but a lot of concern. Okay, but in reality, looking back, now that the market is really more in equilibrium, I don't know exactly, because I don't do this every day anymore. I don't know exactly what amount of work is enrolled in SDI versus bonded. I imagine it's much more closer to even than it was 10 to 15 years ago when Zurich came out with SubGuard and SDI just kind of took off. But I think that was bad news for the industry. But the good news is in my opinion, it made the surety industry much, much better, because all of a sudden there was a player in town and it created a level of competition. The competition was bad, but I keep going back to this example, but it's one everybody knows. If you ever rode in a cab before Uber, and I can remember several times our headquarters is in New York and I was working in Charlotte, so I was in New York a lot for financial matters. And I hated getting in a cab because they were just nasty. They were dirty, smelled bad. You had the glass window, the whole shebang. Well, then Uber comes along and they go, wait a minute, we're going to have to compete. So what happened? Somebody washed the cabs. They took the glass out. They have taxi apps now. And so I'm not saying it was a like for like with the surety industry, but it provided motivation for the industry to change that perception that actually gave rise to SDI. So, I know there were a lot of people, a lot of my peers that weren't crazy about working with their surety. They just looked at it as a necessary evil. I preferred to look at it from the context of, I wouldn't treat my bank any different than I would treat a surety. Both of those were providing credit to my business, and I would treat them both as credit providers versus just a piece of paper. I got to pay for it, pass on the pop cost. Nothing's going to happen. There's no default. It's, there's the indemnity in the back end. The surety never loses anything. But, it's that kind of cynicism, basically. But I looked at it from the perspective of, look, these guys they see a lot of different contractors. They see a lot of different things that work and don't work. So I always would use my surety agent or primarily the agent, but I would say, hey, when you see other subs in my industry, what are you seeing that you like? What are you seeing that you don't like? Particularly when we were going into a new market, okay, if we were going to do work outside of our normal scope, if we were doing scaffolding for a different business in a different state, the things that make sureties nervous, I would always go to them and say, hey, what do you guys think about this? What does this make sense to you? What do you see in this particular market? And if I had isolated that partnership by throwing everything in SDI and saying, I'm not going to write any bonds, I would have cheated myself of the opportunity to have an amazing perspective on things that I wouldn't have had otherwise.
But I love that thought. Particularly because you're talking about all we like to call it kind of the silent services that the surety relationship provides, that, the ability to get information and data in a certain region, benchmarking information, perspectives that you otherwise may not have, that all comes with that relationship. And it sounds like you were able to leverage that at Lend-Lease, and then you can appreciate it in your other roles that you've had over your career.
Yes. And sometimes, Mark, it's not so much even benchmarking. It's just calling up, say you're my agent, and I just call up and say, hey, Mark, we're going to do a job. Let's say I was in Alabama when I left. That was my last job. Hey, we're going to do a scaffolding for a school job in Atlanta. And we've never worked in Atlanta metro market, and we've never done work for a school. And which is probably going to make him nervous if I'm getting a bond.
I was going to say.
So I would say, okay, take a deep breath. I don't think we're going to need a bond. Maybe not. We'll see. But what can you tell me about the market? What can you tell me about the competitors? What does, if you have contractors that are in this space, scaffolding is a little bit of an isolated industry. Say I'm an HVAC or electrical contractor, for example, then the sureties have such a unique perspective of the market that you can't get that from another CFO. I couldn't get that. And and the ops guys wouldn't talk to me or even tell me because we don't speak the same lingo. The beautiful thing about the surety industry is you guys see the entire perspective of the world that you work in. Right. And effectively, it's not, I was going to say it's free, but I mean, it's part of the cost of doing business. It's part of the bond premium. And why not take advantage of it? Why not take advantage of it? So that was my perspective anyway.
Well, and you know, every surety professional really will tell you that it's a relationship business. It's relationship driven. It's not just about the bond. It's much more than that. And I think that's what you're talking about is that you get a lot more than just a bond for a particular contract. There's a whole host of things that go with it.
I think too, being proactive, if you work for a contractor and you really want to get the most out of your surety relationship, then it's like any other relationship. My two big things to my team was no surprises. I mean, I didn't want surprises.
Nobody wants surprises.
Nobody wants surprises, and also provide them information before they ask for it. So like if I knew, like, for example, if we're going to have a quarterly surety meeting and it was coming up in a month, I put a package together and I would send it to my agent at least 3 weeks before the meeting and say, hey, here's the financials. I don't want them to come into the meeting on a cold read because it's beneficial for them to prepare their questions before. And I would say, listen, look at these. If you have questions before the meeting, ask me. You know, I can have or let me know what they are and I'll have an answer prepared when you come to the meeting. It's much more efficient. And, you know, when you would do these kind of things, they're just small things, being proactive, asking people, what do you think? It would make inevitable conflict, because there's always going to be conflict. There's going to be, why did you have profit fade on this job? Or, you know, why is your owner buying that house and 2 jet skis and put them on the balance sheet? You know, that other kind of stuff that you guys do.
That might be harder to explain.
You know, it's funny. It's funny that the very first question I asked when I took this job is I said, do the owners have any personal assets on the balance sheet of the company? Because I knew if they wrote one bond, that was going to be the first question I would get. So again, it was just because of the background that I had at Lindley, so it was really great. But being proactive and giving people information before they ask for it would really make it easier to have when I would have a difficult discussion or I needed something at the last minute. That's probably a better example. If I had a job that popped up and I needed a bond, the relationship, and this is nothing magical, guys. I mean, this is nothing that I'm not, when I say these things, I'm not patting myself on the back. This is just relationships in business. Yep. If I was proactive and I would give them information and I would try to stay in touch with them, hey, we've got a job that looks like it may be going a little sideways. I want to let you know about it now. You know, those types of things before the meeting. So it wasn't a surprise. Then if I came to them at the last minute and said, hey, I've got a job that just popped up. I know this happened a couple of times in New York where we were doing, of course, the projects there are obviously enormous, but a job came in. We didn't think we were going to need a bond in the last minute. It was required, and it needed to be done like in 72 hours. Well, of course, my surety partners would have diligently worked to try to get us there, but because they never told me this, but I believe because we as a team were proactive with our partners, they would put me at the top of the proverbial stack. Because I was trying to help them, and they would do the best they could do to help us. And we, you know, would really guys really appreciate this. Like we would invite them to come to our golf outing, or you know, just any kind of thing we could do to hang out with each other. Because you said it earlier about the relationship itself, and I think the surety partners do a great job of building that relationship from their side. But I think it's on us as users of bonding capacity. People just generally don't realize the asset that they have at their fingertips if they just use it, and the benefit it will bring to them long term if you're just a little proactive during the process. Then when you do have something come up that's difficult or you need something, it just goes much smoother for you. So you're really helping yourself.
Yeah, I mean, part of that is kind of what you hit on earlier is like you're looking specifically at a particular project where I think there's a recognition that the surety's prequalification is a broader based process. And as you said, it's kind of looking more at the whole and they're not mutually exclusive. One can be a complement to the other. And,
Right. Absolutely.
and so I think, yeah, with I think the volatility and uncertainty in the economy, that it makes sense to have different levels and different ways to address risk. So.
No, I agree with that. While you were speaking, I remembered toward the end of my Lend-Lease career, we started a process where, I would say probably 40% of the backlog when I was there was bonded. But obviously the sureties were concerned about the 60% that were not bonded for obvious reasons. And then on those jobs, when we said we would start doing pre-qualifications on every subcontractor over a certain threshold, and I don't know what it was. Maybe it was, the numbers will sound huge, but you have to decide as the contracts. Maybe it was a $2 million package or a $3 million package. We would pre-qualify that subcontractor, even if they weren't going into SDI, and we didn't necessarily think we needed a bond. But again, that kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier. That pre-qualification of that unbonded backlog would give the surety much more concern,
Absolutely.
because they know somebody's looking at it, and therefore the likelihood of it going sideways is not as likely, particularly if I've given them history when something has gone wrong. I've come to them proactively and said, hey, this is a job that looks like we might have an issue with. Well, it's really a combination of those things, I think.
Well, Brad, it's been great having you on and talking about pre-qualification with you. Hopefully we'll be able to get you back on another episode sometime soon.
Well, I appreciate the time, guys. I enjoyed the conversations. It's a great opportunity for me, and appreciate the relationship that I've had with you guys over the years, and thanks for the opportunity to speak with you.
You've been listening to Let's Get Surety, brought to you by the National Association of Surety Bond Producers. For more information about the NASBP and its members, visit nasbp.org.
Before we go, we just wanted to thank Liberty Mutual Surety again for their generous support in supporting this episode of Let's Get Surety. Liberty Mutual Surety provides contract and commercial bonds for all size companies and contractors around the world. Liberty Mutual is here for you today, tomorrow, together. For more information on Liberty Mutual's breadth of surety products and solutions, visit www.libertymutualsurety.com.